And now I'm going to introduce Anne Flash. So thank you so much, Anne, for being here today. And so Anne, it's a pleasure to introduce you as my colleague. You moved to Cape Cod 23 years ago to be closer to your family and also to the ocean. Your work runs the gamut from representational to abstract, tiny to extra large, but landscape is always the central theme and color is always the essential element. You have taught drawing for the last 16 years at the Cape Cod Community College, where you were also the artist in residence in 2008. And you have done also, I'm trying to find my notes, I'm sorry. I'm lost in all my papers. So you have done a lot of artist residencies, 2 at Yaddo and 1 at the Millet Colony. Your work has been exhibited in New York, Connecticut, and the Cape, and is in private and corporate collections in New England. So I want to welcome you, and I love the work you put in the gallery. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie. I hear an echo in the other room. My mother is watching in the other room, which is one of the great things about Zoom. It brings families, friends together, and I want to thank you, Natalie. I'm sorry I wasn't prepared for the feedback that I'm getting. Maybe I can ask my mother to close the door. These are the things, the unpredicted elements that happen on Zoom, which I find very humanizing. At any rate, Natalie, I want to thank you for keeping us, or even starting us in the, in a period of time when we are fragmented, maybe, from ourselves as well as others. This gallery has become this really interesting, I think of it as the hearth of the college. And so I really want to thank you. And I feel like, that there have been a lot of hidden blessings in the last 8 months. I do remember clearly walking out of the school building after an art class, and I thought, I don't know when I'm going to see these students again. And as it turned out, I got to see them every week in this format, and it's in a constant process of becoming, and that seems very much like art making. So I with my fellow studio mate, Carolyn, who I'm about to introduce, we both found ourselves in a situation. We didn't know each other really at the time, but we were closed out of our studio for 3.5 months. We had nowhere to go. And for some, as opportunity would have it, some of us got to know each other a lot more during that time when we weren't allowed in our building, because it gave us a reason to talk on a regular basis. And we Zoomed together, and finally, when things let up a little bit, I asked Carolyn if I could come to her studio. Now, this was before I knew that this was going to be an option to have her work alongside mine. But I went into her studio with a mask, and we distanced and tried not to touch her work too much, although it's very appealing. And I came home from that, and then a couple of weeks later, this opportunity to invite a guest, and I thought, her work is teeny and my work is very large now that I'm in a big studio. And we're both very glad to be back in our studios. Who knows what's coming, but I find her cold wax work really, really compelling. And so I wanted to give her a chance to show and also to talk about it in the spirit of Zoom show and tell. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. I'm honored to be your guest. Um, I work in several mediums. One you mentioned, cold wax and oil, and also straight oil painting and encaustic. And I dabble a little bit in acrylic, but the work I'm presenting today is encaustic work. And if we can, I'll jump right into the first one. Thank you. This is Untitled #4, and I do work at a small scale. This is 6 by 6 inches. And I started, I began painting in encaustic, I believe around 2007, 2008, and this is one of the first paintings I did. And I was, at the time I was doing realistic still life in oil, and I felt like I wanted to loosen up. And so this is what I first came out of the gate with, which I find funny in retrospect. But this was very labor intensive. It was involved a lot of measuring, many layers of clear encaustic medium, and then I'd incise lines into the surface, fill that in, scrape it back. And I started to learn what I liked about that reductive process, that it leaves these artifacts that I find kind of interesting. And also when you see these in person, because there's so many layers, the lines just seem to float, which is a nice optical effect. So, so like I said, this was an earlier piece. If we can move to the second slide. This is, I specialize in hard to photograph work, apparently. This is one of my current pieces, and I have started to work with powdered pigment. And yes, I do wear a mask and I wear gloves because it gets all over the place and it can be quite dangerous if you inhale it. So my process here is this is also a 6 by 6 inch panel, and it's called Blue Ore. And I start with a prepped panel with encaustic medium, scrape down with a razor blade so it's super smooth. And then I rub in a powdered pigment into the surface all over until I like the amount I have on there. And then I fuse it very carefully with a heat gun. And what happens is really fascinating to me. The heat pulls down the pigment into the wax, and it sort of makes it kind of granulated looking, which I really like, that grain. And I have to pay attention very carefully because you can just lose a painting because you're not watching. So I do that process, many layers. I put a layer of clear encaustic on top of this, and then rub in another color and just repeat that process until I get the look I want. And for me, the surface is really important. I like a very smooth surface, and my work is really about color. I start off thinking about, well, I really like that blue, and what would that look like with that ochre? And I just go from there. And this is really how my work has changed since the pandemic. 3.5 months was a long time to be locked out. And so returning, it's like, what was I doing? And I'm trying to pick up. And like Anne said, we don't know what's going to happen. So I felt like working faster and being a little more experimental and just say, hey, just try it. Don't worry about it. Don't overthink it. And so this is what I'm coming up with. And this, let's go to the third slide. Yes. And yes, you can see that. So when you're dealing with encaustic, there's an element of control. There's also an element of improvising. You have to pay attention to your surface and see what's happening with the heat. And this was an instance where the white encaustic paint I was using just sort of sunk, and it did this lacy foam thing. And I just had to step back and was like, oh, okay, that's really interesting to me. And I call this waves, because it was just unexpected, but I really liked the effect. And then, of course, I covered that up with clear encaustic and then started incising kind of wavy organic lines. And I like this piece because it was very fast to make for me. And this is also, it's a 4 by 4 inch painting, so I do paint really small. Yeah, and that, I think we can move on to the next one. Now this one I'm using powdered pigment in, and I'm also using iridescent and interference pigments. And so you can see up in the left-hand corner how there's a light shift. And so this piece, when you angle it, it kind of refracts a color at you, a brighter pink red. And I really like that interactive quality where you can come up to something and then shift and it kind of flashes at you. Again, kind of hard to photograph. And again, this is 4 by 4 inches. And what else do I want to say? I think that's about it, actually.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Hi again. Yeah, I'm really happy to have a chance to show my work. This experience of the last almost a year now, maybe, has been one that has simplified my life a lot. I get to make art, and I get to look out at the water and take care of family and friends. And if you could have the first slide. This is a piece that I'm working on right now. This is a detail. My work is very, very large. This is a detail of an 8-foot piece. And I work with oil pastel as well as oil, literally linseed oil. Sometimes I use olive oil. So I combine drawing and painting in this process, and it's very tactile. All the work that I've done in this media is touch is a big part of it. It's but color and how things look together and the unexpected surprises that we as artists all know about and often delight in happen because I build up layers and I scrape then I scrape them with a knife, where I decide to at the time. And various images of mine have been more planned, but I think mostly I go with a general idea. I always start with a size, and I work most of these big works are 5 squares long horizontally. And if you could show the next slide, Kendra. So this is a piece that's a little different. This is the piece in the gallery. It's called Curly Like Me. It's 8 feet long. It's oil pastel. It's, believe it or not, there's about 5 other pieces under that all were steps to me getting back into my own artwork after a very frozen tundra of 2 years when I could not connect to art making. And I called it Curly Like Me because, as you can see, I have curly hair, and it might seem like a small detail, but it's really had a big impact on my life, having curly hair when everybody else had straight hair. Adolescence and trying to fit in, and then on top of that, going into the studio feeling like I don't know what I'm doing anymore. And I really had to untangle myself over those months. And so this piece was done before the pandemic started, and I decided to show it because there's a lot of light that I think emanates from it, from the piece out into the gallery. And that's very much the way I want my art to do. I want my art to project into a space and to change to affect the viewer. And as the viewer walks by, maybe left to right, right to left, back and forth, the viewer provides the locomotion, and it becomes not just one image, but an image as it develops over time and maybe changes and then comes back to itself or goes somewhere entirely differently. So it is a little bit like Paul Klee's line about a line is a line, however Scott put it, it's a line that goes on a walk. So these are all elements of me, elements around me, and certainly the ocean has had a big impact on my work for the last 20 some odd years that I lived on Cape Cod. So I'm very glad to be here with all of you talented artists. And I want to introduce Vicky. Sorry, this is a long time for an artist to sit still. This is a detail of the last piece, just so you can see it up. So it's like 8 feet long and about 20 inches high. And so thank you for showing all that, Kendra, and for helping us all out.